Human trafficking deprives millions worldwide of their dignity and freedom. It undermines national security, distorts markets, and enriches transnational criminals and terrorists, and is an affront to the universal values we as Americans hold dear. I'm sure you're wondering, what is human trafficking? Well, the Department of Homeland Security has defined human trafficking as being modern slavery, and it involves the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain some sort of labor or commercial sex act. Essentially, human trafficking is broken up into two main forms, which includes sex trafficking and labor trafficking. According to the Office on Trafficking in Persons, or the OTP, sex trafficking is loosely defined as being the act of soliciting, recruiting, or transporting an individual with the intent to force them into participating in the commercial sex industry. However, even if a minor wasn't forced or coerced by a trafficker, meaning they work in the commercial sex industry willingly, the federal law says anyone under the age of 18 working in the commercial sex industry is a victim of sex trafficking. Additionally, the OTP goes on to explain labor trafficking as the recruitment, obtaining, or transportation of an individual for labor by using force, coercion, or deception to subject the individual into involuntary servitude or slavery. So who does human trafficking affect? Dr. Kiss and Zimmerman reported that nearly 25 million people are affected by human trafficking across the globe. Additionally, the International Labor Organization approximates that there are actually 40.3 million victims of human trafficking across the world. To break this number down, 81% of the victims are subjected to labor trafficking, 75% are women and girls, and 25% are minors. At this point, I'm sure you're wondering, why are the statistics concerning who is affected by human trafficking across the globe so different? Well, the United Nations Global Initiative to Fight Human Trafficking claims that this difference is due to several reasons. These are the lack of legislation in some areas, differing legal definitions of who is a trafficking victim, major underreporting because of how difficult it is to identify this crime, and the lack of central databases on human trafficking. The most reliable and comprehensive statistics on who is affected by human trafficking comes from the yearly Trafficking in Persons report, or the TIP report, that is compiled by the U.S. government. The reason why the TIP report is so reliable is due to the fact that almost 200 countries report their statistics to the report. The 2018 TIP report details that over 10,000 victims were identified in the Western Hemisphere. 2,139 of that number were labor trafficking victims. In South Africa, 100,409 victims of human trafficking were identified. In East Asia and the Pacific, almost 11,000 victims were identified. 12,750 victims were identified in Europe. In the Near East, 1,834 victims were identified. And in South and Central Asia, 40,857 victims were identified. It is known that this large demographic of men, women, and children are commonly migrant workers. Migrant workers are one of the most vulnerable populations to be exploited in the United States and across the globe. Something I think that is extremely important for you to know is that traffickers commonly target school-aged children. 200,000 U.S. youth are at risk of becoming commercial sex industry victims. 12 to 14 is the average age of entry for individuals into sex trafficking. The majority of child trafficking victims are students in the American school system. Traffickers often recruit students at school. Research from several cases show that trafficking schemes take place on school grounds, during school events and activities, and amongst fellow students. Traffickers commonly use peers as recruiters. The recruiters create relationships with their classmates to gain more underage victims. Students are even at risk of meeting traffickers when they travel to and from school. So what does human trafficking look like in North Carolina? Concerning the scope of human trafficking in North Carolina, the National Human Trafficking Hotline reported that North Carolina is number 8 on the list of top 10 states in America for human trafficking occurrence. Out of the 228 cases of human trafficking reported in North Carolina in 2017, 154 cases were of sex trafficking, 54 cases were of labor trafficking, 17 cases were of sex and labor trafficking, and 5 cases were unspecified. Dr. Sharon Cooper, a forensic and developmental pediatrician in Fayetteville, North Carolina, who specializes in care for sexually abused or trafficked children, told me one of the reasons why human trafficking is so prevalent in North Carolina is due to North Carolina's geographical location amongst highways like 95 and 40, which both have long-standing histories of being facilitators of trafficking, in addition to North Carolina's large amount of migrant workers. Margaret F. Henderson shared some common environmental conditions that help to facilitate human trafficking. Some of these things are large public events, highway and truck rest stops, and internet ad opportunities, amongst other avenues. In the midst of all this shocking information I just shared with you, I'm actually really happy to tell you that North Carolina has been both steadfast and successful in its pursuit to combating human trafficking against individuals within our state. According to the North Carolina Judicial Branch, North Carolina received an A rating at the national level for its efforts against human trafficking in North Carolina. As a teen, what can I do to help combat human trafficking? To all the woke, socially aware teenagers out there, I'm sure you're wondering, how can we help fight human trafficking? I think a great way to combat human trafficking is by employing the ICE method. So I'm sure you're thinking I mean ICE method in regards to chemistry or even immigration. However, in regards to combating human trafficking, ICE stands for something totally different. It means information, change, and end results. Starting with the I in our acronym, it stands for information. On the 15 ways you can help fight human trafficking list compiled by the U.S. Department of State, one of the ways listed is by informing yourselves. The first thing you can do is start informing yourself by visiting the sites of the Human Trafficking Hotline, the Polis Project, the Office on Trafficking in Persons, Project No Rest, or even the Office for Victims of Crime, amongst other organizations, to learn common things you should know about human trafficking. Some of these things are the signs of a trafficking victim, such as physical signs like cuts or bruises, malnourishment, or costly gifts from someone nobody knows. Another thing that's harmful is what experts refer to as the normalization of sexual harm, which basically means using certain phrases or words that sort of help to normalize or encourage the usage of trafficking-related slang, like Ashley's got a mat or Matthew's straight pimpin'. The C part of our acronym stands for change. At this point, you're really just considering what it is you can do to help change the scope of the issue, particularly in your community. Who knows? You might be the person to introduce a human trafficking awareness club devoted to teaching students all about human trafficking awareness. Last but not least, E stands for end results. At this point, you're basically just sitting down and reflecting on what it is you've done. Were your goals accomplished? And if not, what can you do to improve? In closing, I would like to encourage each and every person watching this video right now to consider thinking of ways you can tackle human trafficking in your community. Like anything in life, start out with a plan, aka the ICE method, and take action. Something as simple as informing a few friends who may not know about human trafficking can be a true game changer. Combating human trafficking is not merely a moral issue or one that affects the interests of the American people. It is also an issue that threatens international peace and security.